We spend so much of our lives carefully constructing the versions of ourselves that we show to the world. We curate our social media profiles to highlight our best moments and hide our struggles. We rehearse what we will say in important conversations, practicing in our minds until the words sound confident and articulate. We dress ourselves in ways that project the image we want others to see, whether that is professional or casual or sophisticated or approachable. We learn to smile at the right times, to laugh at jokes we do not find funny, to nod along with opinions we do not share. We become experts at presenting edited versions of who we are, carefully controlled performances designed to make us likable and acceptable and safe from judgment or rejection. This performance becomes so automatic that we often forget we are doing it. The mask becomes so familiar that it starts to feel like our real face. We move through the world showing people these carefully constructed versions of ourselves, and we call it authenticity, even though we know deep down that we are holding back the messy, complicated, imperfect parts that do not fit the narrative we want others to believe about us. We convince ourselves this is necessary, that showing our full selves would be too risky, too vulnerable, too likely to result in people seeing us as less than the polished versions we have worked so hard to create. But then something happens that we do not plan for and cannot control. Our guard drops for just a moment. Someone catches a glimpse of who we really are beneath all the performance and pretense. And instead of being repelled by our authentic selves, instead of confirming our fears that the real us is not good enough, that person sees something that takes their breath away. They see the unfiltered version of us, and they do not just accept it. They fall in love with it in ways they never expected and cannot fully explain. This is the story of Elena, a 31-year-old woman who had spent most of her adult life believing that love required perfection, that to be worthy of someone's affection, she needed to be the best version of herself at all times. Until she met someone named David, who accidentally saw her at her most unguarded and fell completely, unexpectedly, irreversibly in love with the person she was when she was not trying to be anything at all. Unquote. Elena worked as a corporate lawyer at a prestigious firm in the city, a job that required her to be polished and professional and in control at all times. She dressed impeccably in tailored suits and expensive shoes. She wore her hair in a sleek style that suggested competence and sophistication. She spoke in measured tones, choosing her words carefully to project confidence and authority. At work, Elena was known as someone who had it all together, someone who never let stress show, someone who handled high-pressure situations with grace and poise that made her seem almost superhuman to her colleagues and clients. Her dating life followed similar patterns. Elena approached relationships like she approached her career, as something that required strategy and careful management. She only agreed to dates at nice restaurants where she could dress well and present her best self. She kept conversations light and pleasant, steering away from topics that might reveal too much vulnerability or complexity. She made sure to always look put together when seeing someone she was dating, never letting them see her without makeup or in sweatpants or in any state that suggested she was anything less than the polished professional woman she presented to the world. This approach had resulted in a series of relationships that looked good on paper but felt empty in practice. Elena dated men who were impressed by her accomplishments and her appearance, who liked the idea of being with someone so successful and attractive and seemingly perfect. But these relationships never went deep because Elena never let them. She kept everything surface level, never quite trusting anyone enough to show them the parts of herself that felt messy or uncertain or human. Eventually, these relationships would end, usually with the other person saying something about how they felt like they did not really know Elena. Like there was a wall they could never get past, no matter how much time they spent together. Elena told herself this was fine, that she was just being selective, that the right person would come along who would appreciate the version of herself she chose to show the world. She convinced herself that vulnerability was overrated, that strength meant never letting people see you sweat or struggle or be anything less than composed. She built her life around this belief, and it worked well enough that she did not question it too deeply, did not examine whether the loneliness she sometimes felt might be connected to the walls she had built so carefully around herself. Then she met David at a mutual friend's wedding. He was seated at her table during the reception, a software engineer who worked for a tech startup and seemed comfortable in his own skin in a way that Elena found both attractive and slightly unsettling. David did not try to impress her with big stories or accomplishments. He asked her genuine questions about her work and seemed actually interested in her answers, rather than just waiting for his turn to talk. When Elena gave her usual polished responses about her career, David would follow up with questions that pushed slightly deeper, not in an invasive way, but in a curious way that suggested he wanted to know more than just the surface-level information she was used to sharing. They exchanged numbers at the end of the night and started texting over the following weeks. Elena maintained her usual boundaries, keeping things light and casual, presenting the same carefully curated version of herself that she showed to everyone. David was patient with this, never pushing for more than she seemed willing to share, but also consistently showing up in ways that felt different from the other men Elena had dated. He would check in on her after he knew she had a big case at work, not with generic "how are you" texts, but with specific questions that showed he remembered details she had mentioned and actually cared about how things had turned out. After a few weeks of texting, they started going out on actual dates. Dinners at nice restaurants where Elena could dress up and present her polished self. A museum exhibit where she could showcase her knowledge of art and culture. A concert where they could enjoy music together without needing to talk too much or reveal too much. Elena felt comfortable with these dates because they allowed her to maintain the performance she was so used to giving, to be the impressive version of herself that had always felt safest. But then something happened that Elena had not planned for, a moment that would completely change the trajectory of their relationship and force her to confront everything she believed about what it meant to be loved and accepted by another person. It was a Saturday morning, about 2 months after they had started dating, and Elena had agreed to meet David for coffee before they went to a farmer's market together, a casual daytime date that Elena had carefully prepared for by waking up early to do her hair and makeup and choose an outfit that looked effortlessly cute, even though she had tried on 5 different combinations before settling on one. But as Elena was getting ready, disaster struck in the form of a phone call from her mother, who was having a crisis with Elena's elderly grandmother, who lived with her parents and was refusing to take her medication and becoming increasingly confused and agitated. Elena spent 45 minutes on the phone trying to calm her mother down and help problem solve the situation from a distance, feeling helpless and frustrated and scared about her grandmother's declining health. By the time she hung up, Elena realized she was now running extremely late to meet David and had no time to finish getting ready the way she had planned. She looked at herself in the mirror and saw someone who looked nothing like the polished woman she usually presented to dates. Her hair was only half done, her makeup was incomplete with just some mascara and nothing else, and she was still wearing the old sweatpants and oversized college t-shirt she had slept in, because she had not had time to change into the outfit she had carefully selected. Elena's first instinct was to cancel, to text David some excuse about an emergency at work, to avoid letting him see her like this when she looked so far from her usual put-together self. But something stopped her from canceling. Maybe it was the emotional exhaustion from the phone call with her mother that had left her too drained to maintain her usual careful boundaries. Maybe it was a tiny voice in her head, wondering what would happen if she just showed up as she was, instead of as she wanted to be seen. Maybe it was the fact that David had been so consistently kind and patient that some part of her was willing to risk showing him a less polished version of herself. Whatever the reason, Elena made a split-second decision that terrified her. She threw on a pair of jeans and sneakers with the old t-shirt she was already wearing, pulled her hair into a messy ponytail, and headed out the door to meet David exactly as she was. No performance, no polish, no carefully constructed image. When Elena walked into the coffee shop where they had agreed to meet, she immediately felt self-conscious about her appearance. She spotted David at a corner table and almost turned around and left, but he looked up at that exact moment and saw her. Elena braced herself for disappointment or confusion in his expression. for some sign that he was taken aback by how different she looked from their previous dates. But instead, something extraordinary happened. David's entire face lit up with this smile that was so genuine and so warm that it made Elena's chest feel tight. He stood up as she approached and said she looked beautiful in a tone that suggested he absolutely meant it. They sat down and Elena immediately started apologizing, explaining about the crisis with her grandmother and how she had not had time to get ready properly and how she knew she looked terrible compared to usual. But David stopped her mid-apology and said something that would echo in Elena's mind for a long time afterward. He said, "You look like yourself right now, and I have been wanting to see this version of you since we met." Elena did not know what to say to that, did not quite know how to process the idea that someone might actually prefer her unpolished version to the carefully constructed one she worked so hard to present. As they sat there talking over coffee, Elena found herself being more honest and open than she had been in any of their previous interactions. Maybe it was because she was too emotionally drained to maintain her usual walls. Maybe it was because showing up looking less than perfect had already broken down some of her defenses. Whatever the reason, Elena started talking about real things, about how scared she was about her grandmother's health, about how guilty she felt for not being able to help her parents more from a distance, about how hard it was to feel competent and in control at work while feeling helpless and inadequate in her personal life. David listened without trying to fix anything or offer hollow reassurances. He asked questions that showed he was really hearing what she was saying. He shared his own experiences with aging grandparents and the complicated feelings that came with watching people you love decline. The conversation went deeper than any they had had before, and Elena realized that letting her guard down had created space for real connection in a way that all her careful performances never had. What Elena did not know was that something profound had shifted for David in that moment when she walked into the coffee shop, looking nothing like the polished woman from their previous dates. He had found Elena attractive and interesting from the beginning, had enjoyed their time together and appreciated her intelligence and success. But he had also sensed the walls she kept up, the way she seemed to be performing a version of herself rather than just being herself. He had been patient with this because he liked her enough to wait and see if she would eventually let him past those walls. But when Elena showed up that Saturday morning in an old t-shirt and messy ponytail, with worry written all over her face, and no makeup hiding the dark circles under her eyes from a stressful week at work, David saw something that took his breath away. He saw the real Elena, vulnerable and imperfect and completely human. He saw her without the armor she usually wore, and instead of being disappointed, he fell completely in love with what he saw. The woman sitting across from him, talking honestly about her fears and her struggles and her feelings of inadequacy. That woman was more beautiful to David than any polished version Elena had ever presented. Over the following weeks and months, something shifted in their relationship. Elena started showing up more often as her authentic self. Still sometimes polished and put together, but also sometimes tired or stressed, or in sweatpants, eating ice cream directly from the container while complaining about a difficult case at work. And David made it clear, through his actions and his words, that he loved all these versions of her, that the messy human moments were not something to apologize for, but something precious that he felt honored to witness. David explained to Elena much later, after they had been together for almost a year, that he had fallen in love with her unexpectedly on that Saturday morning when she showed up to their coffee date, looking nothing like she usually did. He said he had been attracted to her before that, had enjoyed spending time with her, had thought she was impressive and interesting. But it was when he saw her vulnerable and unguarded and just being herself without any performance that he realized he was falling in love with her. He said the polished version of Elena was beautiful, but the real version, the one who showed up in an old t-shirt, worried about her grandmother, that version was the one he wanted to spend his life with. This revelation changed something fundamental for Elena, teaching her that the parts of herself she had always tried to hide were actually the parts that made her most worthy of love. That vulnerability was not weakness, but the foundation of real intimacy. That being seen in her full, imperfect humanity was more valuable than being admired for a carefully constructed image. Elena learned that David had fallen in love with her, not despite her imperfections, but in some ways because of them, because those imperfections made her real and human, and someone he could actually connect with, rather than just admire from a distance. He loved her laugh when something was genuinely funny, the way her whole face would light up, and she would throw her head back without caring how she looked. He loved the way she talked to her mother on the phone with such patience, even when the conversations were difficult. He loved catching her dancing in the kitchen when she thought no one was watching, completely unself-conscious and free in a way she never was in public. All these moments when Elena was not trying to be impressive or perfect, when she was just being herself without thinking about how it looked or what it said about her, those were the moments David treasured most. He told her that falling in love with someone unexpectedly was scary because it meant falling without preparation or defense, but it was also the most real thing he had ever experienced because it was based on who Elena actually was, rather than who she thought she needed to be to deserve love. Their relationship deepened in ways Elena had never experienced in her previous relationships, because it was built on a foundation of authentic connection rather than performance and pretense. Elena learned to show up as herself more often, to let David see her in all her complicated humanity, rather than just the polished version she presented to the world. She learned that being vulnerable did not make her weak, but actually made her stronger, because it allowed for real intimacy and connection in ways that her walls never could. Years later, Elena would tell people that the best thing that ever happened to her was showing up to a date in an old t-shirt and messy ponytail, completely unprepared and unpolished and just herself, because that was the moment David saw the real her and fell in love. The moment when she learned that the authentic version of herself was more than enough, was actually everything to the right person. She learned that love does not require perfection or performance, that the most powerful connections happen when we let ourselves be seen in our full, imperfect humanity. That falling in love unexpectedly often means falling in love with the real person beneath all the carefully constructed images we present to protect ourselves. The story of Elena and David is a reminder that sometimes the moments we are most afraid of, the moments when our guard is down and we are not at our best, those are actually the moments that allow for real connection to happen. Sometimes being seen in our vulnerability is exactly what opens the door for someone to fall in love with who we really are. Sometimes the version of ourselves we work so hard to hide is the version that someone else finds most beautiful and most worthy of love. So maybe we should all be a little less afraid of showing up as we really are, a little more willing to let people see us unfiltered and imperfect and completely human, because that might be exactly what someone needs to see to fall completely, unexpectedly, beautifully in love with us.